Let me ask you something. Are you still writing ugly, repetitive if statements just to check for null or undefined values? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But there is a much, much better way. You're staring at your code. You've got functions cluttered with checks. Maybe you're handling data from an API. Maybe it's user input. And everywhere you look, you see the same old pattern. It's the defensive code we were all taught to write. But let's be honest. It's ugly, it's repetitive, it's verbose, and it makes your code a pain to read. For years, developers looked for a cleaner way to do this. A way to just say, hey, if this value's not here, use the fallback. This search led a lot of us to use the logical OR operator, the double pipes, as a sort of shorthand. And for a while, it seemed like a pretty good solution. It was a single line, and it was way cleaner. But the OR operator has a nasty little secret. And it's probably introduced bugs in apps that you've worked on, or even apps that you've written. You see, it's a convenient liar. It doesn't just check null or undefined values, but rather it triggers on any falsy value. And that tiny detail is where everything falls apart. What happens when a totally valid value in your app is the number 0 or an empty string? The OR operator doesn't care. It sees a falsy value and it bulldozes it with your default. But what if I told you there was a logical operator added in ES 2020 that does exactly what you're looking for? An operator that is precise, intentional, and just elegant. One that gets the critical difference between a value being falsy and a value being nullish. This is the nullish coalescence operator, and it is, without a doubt, one of the smartest little additions to modern JavaScript. So before we get into the good stuff, we need to understand what's so wrong with the old way of doing things, using the logical OR operator. For a long time, this was everyone's go-to for setting default values. The logic seemed simple. If the value on the left is falsy, just use the value on the right. Let's take a look at a classic example. Say you're trying to get a user's name to show in the UI. If the user's name exists, you show it. If it doesn't, you just show guest. Using the OR operator, it would probably look something like this. We would say display name equals user supplied name or guest. So in this case, since user supplied name is null or a falsy value, then we would show guest. But you see, this is where the trap is set. Because in JavaScript, null and undefined are not the only falsy values. There's also false, not a number, the number 0, and an empty string. The logical OR operator treats all of them exactly the same. Now let's think of a different scenario. What if you're building a settings panel and a user can set a value to 0? Maybe a volume control, or say the number of items in a cart. Look at this code. Say we initialize the items in the cart to 0. The user has 0 items. That is a perfectly valid state. And we have a display count where we want it to display the items in the cart or default it to 10 for some reason. This will always log 10. That is a bug. It's subtle, but it's a big deal. Our user specifically chose 0, but because 0 is falsy, our code ignores that choice and slaps in the default value of 10. The OR operator just isn't smart enough to know that 0 was a real, intentional value here. And we have the same exact problem with empty strings. Imagine a user profile where someone can set an empty title for themselves. They are allowed to have no title, but that would be an empty string in this case. Something like this. Again, the OR operator overwrites a valid input here because it sees a faulty value and tosses it aside. This kind of thing forces us right back in to writing those clunky if statements, which completely defeats the purpose of having simple one-liners in the first place. This was the core problem for years. How do we set a default only when the value is truly missing, null or undefined, while leaving other falsy values alone? And that brings us to the hero of our story, the nullish coalescing operator. This operator was introduced in ES 2020, and it's designed to fix this exact problem. Its logic is simple, precise, and exactly what we want most of the time. The rule is the nullish coalescing operator returns the value on the right side only when the value on the left is either null or undefined. Otherwise, it returns the value on the left. That's it. It doesn't care about 0 or false or not a number or an empty string. It only cares about the two values that truly mean nothing is here. These are called nullish values, which is where the operator gets its name. Let's fix our broken examples and see what happens. If we change this one to a nullish coalescing operator, it looks at the items in cart. It sees the value 0 and it asks, is this null or undefined? Nope. So then it will log out the value on the left, which in this case is 0. The user's choice is preserved. Now let's fix the user title example, where an empty string was a valid choice. If we change this to a nullish coalescing operator, it works exactly the way you would expect. The operator checks the value of user title, sees that it's an empty string, and since it isn't null or undefined, it returns the empty string. It respects the user's choice. But what about our original use case, where the value actually is null? Or even one where the value is undefined? Like this. It behaves exactly like the logical OR operator did. When the left side is null or undefined, it falls back correctly to the value on the right. The nullish coalescing operator gives you the best of both worlds. A clean one-line syntax for default values, but with a precision to avoid those annoying bugs from the OR operator. It lets you write code that's not just shorter, but safer and more intentional. You're clearly saying, I only want to fall back for actually missing values. That clarity makes your code so much easier for you and everyone else to read. The nullish coalescing operator is amazing on its own, but it has a perfect partner that makes it even more powerful, the optional chaining operator. If you haven't used the optional chaining operator, it solves a related and equally annoying problem. Trying to access a property deep inside a nested object when you're not even sure that the path to that property exists. Before optional chaining, if you wanted to get something like a user's zip code, you'd have to write this disaster. What a mess! It's so repetitive, and if you forget one of those checks, or a user or user.address was null, your app would throw a type error and crash. Optional chaining fixes this beautifully. Instead of a dot to access a property, you use a question mark and a dot. If the thing on the left is null or undefined, the whole thing just stops and returns undefined right there. No errors thrown. So this ugly block becomes this. And if any one of these properties returns null or undefined, it stops right there. It safely drills down as far as it can go. But what is the connection to our nullish coalescing operator? Well, what does optional chaining give us if a property can't be found? It gives us undefined. And what does the nullish coalescing operator check for? Null or undefined. They're a perfect match. You can use optional chaining to safely try to get a value, and then you can use nullish coalescing to set a default if no value is found. Let's put them together. Say we want to get this user zip code, And if it's missing anywhere along the way, just default to 10001. That would look like this. Let's break it down. We look at our user object, which does exist, and inside that user object, we're looking for a property address. Address is undefined. So optional chaining would kick in, and this part here would evaluate to undefined. The rest of this chain would immediately stop because we hit an undefined value. So the entire left side of this would equal undefined. The nullish coalescing operator would see that we have an undefined here, so it would default to 10001. This single clean readable line of code safely digs through a complex data object and provides a reliable default. This combo is how you write clean, modern, bulletproof JavaScript for handling data that might not be there. You'll see this pattern everywhere in modern web applications, from React frontends to Node.js backends. So we've seen the old way, the flawed logical OR operator that can accidentally overwrite good data like a 0 or an empty string. We've met the new, smarter way, the precise nullish coalescing operator that only steps in for null and undefined. And we've seen its true power when you pair it with its sidekick, optional chaining. This isn't just a small syntax change. It's a huge step in how we write safe and predictable JavaScript. By using nullish coalescence, you're choosing to write code that's clearer, less buggy, and more direct about what you're trying to do. You're moving past those old habits that made us choose between writing tons of code or risking weird bugs. So I encourage you to go through some of your projects. Where are you still using the OR operator to set defaults? Is there a place where 0 or an empty string could cause a hidden bug? Try replacing it with the nullish coalescence operator, and watch your code instantly get smarter and safer. What are some of the most frustrating bugs you've run into because of the logical OR operator? And where are you excited to use the nullish coalescence in the future? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear what real-world problems this smart little operator can help solve for you. And if you found this breakdown helpful and you want more tips for writing cleaner, smarter code, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.